If someone had told me her perfume would arrive before her voice, I would have braced for impact. It was 2:07 a.m. when the knock came. Not a light knock. Not the kind someone gives when they're unsure they should be there. No, this one was firm, almost demanding. Just enough to pull me from half sleep and send a jolt of annoyance down my spine. I didn't expect visitors. Not at that hour. Not anymore. Not since I'd left Harborview, left the office, left everything behind. I padded across the hardwood floor barefoot, still in the oversized hoodie I wore to bed, half expecting to find a drunk neighbor at the door. What I didn't expect was her. Sloan Voss, the CEO, the woman who had once sat across the boardroom table from me and signed off on a decision that tanked my promotion, sidelined me in front of the entire company, and led me to quit before they could fire me. The woman who hadn't spoken to me in 10 months. And now she was standing on my porch wearing a silk blouse with one sleeve slipping off her shoulder, makeup smudged, eyes glassy, and a bottle of whiskey dangling from her fingertips. I didn't speak. Not at first. I didn't need to. The look on her face wrecked, hesitant, defiant. Told me this wasn't planned. Or maybe it was. And that was worse. What the hell are you doing here? I finally asked. Her lips parted like she might say something clever, something cutting, something Sloan, but all she managed was, I didn't know where else to go. So, you drove 2 hours to knock on my door in the middle of the night. I didn't drive. Ramon dropped me off. Your driver knows where I live. He does now. I blinked. This had to be a dream. A sick one. A cruel, twisted fantasy. Where the woman who'd ruined my life showed up looking like regret, smelling like liquor and desperation. You need to leave. I can't. Why not? If you enjoyed this content and want to support the channel in a special way, try clicking the thanks button below. It's the one with the heart and $sign icon. With super thanks, you can make a direct contribution to the channel, which helps me keep creating awesome videos for you. Because if I leave, she said, voice breaking just slightly, I'll do something stupid like ruin another woman's career. That landed. She flinched for a second. The CEO mask cracked. She looked small human. Can I come in? Absolutely not. She stepped forward anyway, unsteady on her heels. I didn't step back, and suddenly we were inches apart. I could smell her perfume. Jasmine, heat and memory. Please, she whispered, my jaw clenched. I should have slammed the door. Should have called someone, but I didn't. I stepped aside. She walked in like she belonged there. Like she hadn't taken everything from me and left me with nothing but bruised pride and unanswered emails. I shut the door behind her, slower than I meant to. She collapsed onto my couch, the whiskey bottle rolling to the floor. Her heels came off with a practiced kick. She looked up at me with those eyes, cold steel wrapped in smoke, and said, I haven't stopped thinking about you. I folded my arms. That makes one of us. Liar. I swallowed. You don't get to do this. You don't get to show up and pretend we had something. We did have something. We had tension. We had possibility. You had power. I snapped. And you used it to destroy me. I didn't mean to. That doesn't change what you did. Silence fell heavy between us. She leaned back, eyes fluttering shut. For a second, I thought she might pass out, but then she spoke, barely audible. I didn't know how to want you without ruining you. The words hit like a slap. I sat down, not near her, across the room. Safer. You don't get to rewrite history. I'm not. Her voice was rough. I'm just tired of pretending you were nothing. What do you want, Sloan? I want to say I'm sorry. Too late. I know. And I think I still want you. My heart punched against my ribs. You're drunk and honest. Go home. I don't have one. Istertahia. Really looked. The way her hands trembled. The way her lipstick was smudged like she'd been biting it. The way her blouse clung to her chest as she breathed, shallow, rapid, like being near me hurt. Why now? I asked. Why not? Because I needed you then. She opened her eyes. And I couldn't be what you needed. I was too busy being what the board wanted. And now I don't know who I am if you're not hating me. Something in me cracked. I stood, went to the kitchen, filled a glass, brought it back. Drink. She did, slow. I sat again. You can sleep here, on the couch. But in the morning, we talk. Okay. And no more whiskey. Scout's honor. You were never a scout. You don't know that. I almost smiled. Almost. She lay down, pulled a blanket over herself. Her eyes stayed on mine. I'm sorry, she murmured again. Sleep. Will you stay? I'm not going anywhere. Her eyes slid shut, her breathing evened, and I watched the woman who once made me feel like nothing curled on my couch like a fallen queen. I couldn't tell whether I wanted to kiss her or scream. She was still out when I woke, sprawled across my couch like she belonged, like she hadn't blown up my career with a single signature. Sloan Boss, barefoot, undone. The mighty Sio, exhaling softly into one of my throw pillows while sunlight knifed across her jaw. I stared until the anger rose and receded the way it always did. I hated how right she looked in my space. I hated how good she looked with her armor off. And I hated that some part of me still wanted to touch her. I chose the kitchen instead. Coffee. Quiet. A slow throb behind my eyes from a night that never really ended. Halfway through my second cup, she stirred. A small groan. Her head rolled, lips parting like waking hurt. Water, I called without turning. And Advil, if I'm feeling generous. A beat, then her voice, I thought you were a dream. No such luck. What time is it? Almost 9. She sat up carefully. I heard the blanket slide to the floor. When I turned, she was blinking like she'd forgotten how daylight works, hair a mess, blouse wrinkled, lipstick smeared into something closer to a bruise than a memory. You didn't leave, she said. I said I wouldn't. She looked around, as if just remembering this wasn't a suite or a penthouse but my home. Modest. Clean. Quiet. A long way from the marble corridors she haunted in stilettos. I'm sorry, she said again. Still too late. Can I explain? Why? So you can feel better? So you can say it wasn't just ambition? I scoffed. You torpedoed my promotion, undercut every project I led for 3 months until walking away was the only option. You sat in meetings while they tore me apart and said nothing. And now you want to talk about feelings. I didn't mean to hurt you like that. But you did. She stood slowly, wincing at the drumbeat in her skull. May I please have some water? I handed her the glass. Our fingers brushed. She flinched. I didn't. You were the best strategist we had, she said after a sip. And I was the most inconvenient. No, she said quickly. You were, she stopped. I waited. She didn't finish. Say it, I pressed. What was I, Sloan? Her eyes locked on mine, steady despite the hangover. You were the only person in that building who ever scared me. Not because of what you could take from me, but because of what I wanted to give you. My breath caught. I hated how easily she could still do that. Dismantle me with one line. Then why did you destroy everything? Because I was falling in love with you and I didn't know how to live with that. My chest went cold. You don't get to say that to me now. I know you don't get to admit love after everything you did, but I'm still saying it because it's true. Silence stretched between us. Her hands were shaking again. She gripped the glass harder. I moved to the window, needing space, distance, air. Do you know what it's like to rebuild your entire sense of self from nothing? I asked. To go from running teams and being respected to applying for jobs that didn't even call back. Yes, she said quietly. You still had your title, and I hated myself for it every day after you left. I turned. Then why didn't you call? Because I was a coward. You were a CEO. Same thing, she said bitterly. I could run companies. I could face billion-dollar decisions. But I couldn't admit I was in love with the woman whose ideas threatened my entire foundation. So you crushed me to keep the company balanced. No, I crushed you because I thought if I silenced the part of me that wanted you, everything else would stop unraveling. I laughed once, sharp and humorless. And how's that working out? I'm here, aren't I? She said, on your couch, hungover, wrecked. And what do you expect now? Redemption, sex, forgiveness. I expect nothing, she said. But I wanted you to know the truth. I wanted you to look at me and know I regret it every second. I studied her. The fall of her shoulders, the tension in her jaw, the vulnerability she never let anyone see. You still love me? I asked before I could stop myself. She nodded. Do you love me? I hate what you did to me. That's not a no. I closed my eyes. You don't get to have both. You can't destroy me and expect me to come running back because you're finally ready to feel something. I don't want you to run, she said. I want you to look me in the eye and say there wasn't something between us before it all went to hell. I opened my eyes. There was something and it hurt more than anything when you let it die. Then let me try to fix it. How? I asked. You want to go back? Rewind time. Give me the job I earned. No, she said. I want to give you something real this time. Not a job, not a title. Just me? You think that's enough? I hope so. The silence stretched again and then I moved one step, two until I was standing in front of her. Her breath hitched. My fingers reached for her face, hesitant. She didn't move. I touched her jaw, her cheek, her mouth. She closed her eyes. Do you know what it did to me? I whispered when I realized I wasn't just losing a job. I was losing you, too. She opened her eyes. Then let me earn you back. I leaned in. Our mouths were a breath apart. My pulse thundered. This doesn't mean I forgive you. I don't need forgiveness, she whispered. Just a second chance. And I kissed her, not soft, not sweet, but with months of rage and longing and unfinished conversations. She kissed me back like she'd been waiting for this moment since the day I walked away. Clothes didn't come off. Not yet, but hands explored, lips burned. Her breath hitched when I pushed her back against the wall, her fingers tangling in my hair. Tell me to stop, I said against her mouth. I can't, she gasped. Then don't. And we stayed like that, pressed together, shaking from everything we couldn't say. It wasn't healing. Not yet. But it was something. A beginning maybe, or an ending we finally deserved. I woke up with the taste of her still in my mouth. And the weight of what I'd done pressed hard against my chest. The sun was bright, too bright, bleeding through the blinds like it was trying to force me awake, like it wanted to show me everything I didn't want to see. I didn't open my eyes right away. I lay there listening. No footsteps, no movement, just silence and then a sound. Water running the shower. She was still here. Of course she was. I rolled over, burying my face in the pillow, trying to ground myself, trying to find clarity in the wreckage of what had just happened. I'd kissed her. I'd pulled her in like she hadn't ruined me. Like she wasn't the reason I'd had to rebuild my life from scraps. Like I hadn't spent the last year dreaming of what I'd say if I ever saw her again. And none of those dreams ended with her breathless in my arms. I should have stopped it. I should have pushed her out the door the second she stepped into my apartment. But I didn't. I kissed her like I still needed her because maybe deep down I did. The bathroom door opened. I heard her footsteps now, slow, bare against the hardwood. I sat up. She appeared in the doorway wearing the same rumpled blouse from last night. Her hair damp, her eyes clear for the first time in days. She looked at me like she was bracing for a slap. I didn't give her one. I just said you stayed. You told me I could. That was before. Before what? Before I kissed you. She nodded. Do you regret it? I hesitated. No. Her shoulders relaxed just enough. But I don't know what it means. It means we're not finished. That's not good enough. Then tell me what you need. Answers, I said. Honesty. Not the polished CEO version. I want to know why you did it. All of it. She walked to the chair across from me and sat down, her spine straight, hands clasped in her lap. You are brilliant. You challenged me in every meeting, every presentation. And you did it without ego. Just facts. Fire. Presence. The board loved you. I hated how much I wanted to impress you. So you punished me. I tried to control the narrative. She said they saw you rising and I saw myself losing control. Not because you weren't worthy, but because I knew what I felt for you would ruin both of us if it got out. So you buried me to protect yourself. Yes. Her voice was barely a whisper. I sabotaged your advancement because I was terrified. I thought if I made you less visible, I could quiet what was happening in my own head. I stood up pacing now. And all that time while I was wondering what I'd done wrong while people stopped returning my calls, you were protecting your reputation. No, she said I was protecting the only part of me that ever felt human. You made me feel everything and I didn't know how to handle it. So you broke me. Yes. The word hung there naked. Final. And I hated myself for it. I stopped pacing. Looked at her. Then why come here now? Because I couldn't keep pretending I didn't care. And because when I'm not near you, everything feels hollow. You think that fixes anything? No. You think showing up with whiskey and a confession makes this okay? No, she said again, voice cracking. But I hoped it might start something new. I walked to the window, arms folded. My reflection looked foreign, hair messy, mouth red from her kisses, eyes tired. I hated that I still wanted her. I hated that no matter what she said, part of me was still that woman in the conference room, drawn to her like gravity. What if I told you I still think about the last pitch we worked on together? I said the one with the urban redevelopment campaign. I think about it, too. I remember every time our hands brushed. Every time you looked at me like I was fire and you were trying not to burn. You were fire and you doused me with your silence. She stood now slowly walking toward me. Then let me say the things I should have said then. Why? I asked. So we can start something that will break me again. So I can prove that I'm not that woman anymore. People don't change in 10 months. Sometimes they do when they lose the only thing that mattered. You're still trying to sell it like a pitch because it's all I know. Then learn something else. I snapped. If you want me, really want me, then stop trying to negotiate your way back into my life and show up as the woman who's capable of loving someone more than her reputation. Her jaw clenched. She stepped closer. I love you. You don't even know me anymore. Then let me relearn you. Let me sit in every room you're in and listen. Let me see who you are without needing to control it. Let me be the version of myself who doesn't need to win, just needs you to stay. My breath hitched. You said that once, I whispered. You said I scared you. You still do. Good. I stepped back. Because if this is going to happen, you're not going to get the girl you left behind. You're going to get the woman who survived what you did and still figured out how to build herself from ashes. Her eyes didn't leave mine. I want her. Then prove it. How? Stay. I said. Not just here. Not just today. Stay in the discomfort. Stay in the truth. Stay when it isn't easy. I will. We'll see. She came toward me more slowly this time. No reaching out. No touch. Just standing there, breathing. May I kiss you? She asked. No, I said. Not until I believe you. She nodded. Then I'll wait. Good. I want you too. And I left the room, because sometimes love isn't a kiss, or a bed, or a night spent tangled in forgiveness. Sometimes it's a line you hold, a quiet you keep, a door left open not as an invitation but as a test of who will walk through and remain. She stayed. That was the first shock. She didn't bolt when I walked away. Didn't storm out. Didn't slam anything. Didn't chase the last word the way she always had in boardrooms and closed-door conversations. She simply stayed, silent and still, like she knew any sudden noise might snap the fragile thread we had left. I kept to the other room most of the morning. I needed distance, time, air. I needed to remember that the leverage was mine now, because that's what this was, a reversal. For so long, she held the final say, the cold control behind every office door I entered. Now she was in my space, waiting on what I'd choose. And I hadn't chosen yet. Around noon, I went back to the kitchen and found her still at the table. Same clothes, hair drying into waves, her phone set aside as if she'd decided not to retreat into the easy hum of work. She looked up at the sound of me. No smile. No movement. You hungry? I asked. Her eyes widened a fraction. I could eat. I don't have anything fancy. Eggs, toast. Maybe some fruit if it's not gone bad. That sounds perfect. Sit tight. I busied myself with the fridge and the stove, small domestic motions that felt surreal under the weight between us. I could feel her watching. Every reach, every turn. Her hunger wasn't for food. It was for access, something beyond permission. You always cook when you're avoiding something, she said softly. Only when I'm deciding how cruel to be. And still undecided? I plated the food and set it in front of her. She blinked at it like it might be a peace offering. Maybe it was. Maybe it was a test. We ate without talking. The soft clink of cutlery was the only thread of sound. I studied her posture, straight, composed, but looser than usual. No blazer, no heels, no boardroom cadence. Just Sloan Voss in a slept-in blouse, trying not to fracture at my table. Why didn't you fire me? I asked, abrupt. She paused mid-bite. What? You could have. You had every reason, every tool. You undercut me in meetings, froze me out of projects, handed my proposals to other teams, but you never pulled the trigger. Why? She set down her fork. Because firing you would have erased you completely, and I wasn't ready to lose every part of you. I thought if I made it unbearable enough that you'd leave on your own. Then I could pretend it wasn't my choice. You're unbelievable. I know. You manipulated me into leaving so you didn't have to face your own feelings. Yes. And now you want me to forgive you for that? No, she said quietly. I want you to understand how deeply I hated myself for it. Every time I passed your empty office. Every time I walked into a meeting without your voice. I told myself I was protecting the company, protecting myself, but really I was proving how skilled I am at destroying the only thing that mattered to me outside a quarterly report. My chest tightened. I hated that her voice still did this, turned everything into something that sounded like poetry, like something worth saving. You know, I said, leaning against the counter. You always looked so put together, every hair in place, every sentence calculated. You were untouchable. That was the goal. But under all that, you're just a woman who's never been told no. And now you are. I walked over slowly until I was standing beside her chair. She tilted her head up to look at me. Her eyes were different now, clearer. No spin, no game. Do you still want me? I asked. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Yes, even like this with you not in control. Especially like this. I stepped closer. She didn't move. I reached out, ran my fingers lightly down the line of her collarbone. She shivered. Then prove it, I said. Take off your shirt. She blinked. What? You heard me. Is this revenge? No, it's clarity. You say you want something real, then be real. Show me the woman you were too afraid to be when you had everything to lose. Her hands trembled, but she obeyed. Button by button, she undid her blouse slow, exposing skin that made my mouth dry. She slid it off her shoulders, let it fall, and then she looked at me, chest rising, eyes unguarded. Vulnerable, beautiful, happy now? She asked. Not yet. I reached out, touched her jaw, traced the curve of her throat. You wanted to be seen. Now you are, and what do you see? I leaned in, whispered against her mouth. Someone I could still want if I let myself. Her breath caught, but I didn't kiss her. Not yet. I pulled back. Put your shirt back on. Her brow furrowed. Why? Because I needed to know if you could be stripped of power and still stay. She exhaled shakily, fingers moving to redress. And you passed, I said barely. She gave a breathless laugh. You're cruel. No, I said I'm careful because last time I gave you everything. You turned it into a weapon. I won't do that again. You don't get to say that. You have to show me. She finished buttoning her blouse, then looked at me. Then I guess I'd better start learning how. You've got time, I said. If you stay, I will. She stood, walked to me, stopped inches away. And if I asked to kiss you now, you'd be denied. I said, smiling slightly. Again, I want you to want me when I say yes. Not because you're desperate, because you're certain. And if I never get certain, then we'll both know. You're not afraid I'll leave. I'm terrified. I said, but I'd rather be alone than a secret again. She nodded. Understood. She didn't touch me again. She walked away, sat back down, and started eating her now cold eggs like they were the only thing anchoring her. And I watched her, not as the woman who broke me, but as the one who might be willing to bleed to be rebuilt beside me. It was my idea to leave the apartment. I needed air, distance from the walls that had suddenly started to feel too narrow with her in them. I told her we'd go for coffee, neutral, daylight. Public, a test, maybe, or a trap, or just something to stop me from staring at the way she moved around my space. Like she was trying to shrink herself small enough to be tolerated. She agreed instantly. No hesitation, just nodded, slipped on her coat, and followed me out the door like she belonged at my side. The streets were still slick from the morning rain. The cafe I chose was a little hole in the wall placed 3 blocks away, tucked between a bookstore and a laundromat, ivy-colored brick, foggy windows, a safe place to hide in plain sight. We walked in silence. Not the uncomfortable kind, the waiting kind. The kind that held too many words pressed against both of our teeth. I didn't reach for her hand. She didn't offer hers. And yet, every step was charged. Tense like we were both aware that this walk, this ordinary, quiet walk, meant something more. When we reached the cafe, I opened the door first. She stepped inside after me, her eyes scanning the space. It was almost empty. A man in the corner with headphones. A couple arguing softly near the window. The barista with a pink buzz cut and tattoos up her arms gave us a polite nod. I ordered black coffee. Sloane asked for herbal tea. You always drank espresso, I said as we waited. Stop sleeping, she replied. Switch to something weaker. I nodded. We took a table in the corner. Not the darkest, but not by the window either. I watched her across the small table, her hands wrapped around the ceramic mug, fingers steady despite everything. She looked at me like she was still afraid to speak. So, I broke the silence. "What's your plan, Sloane?" She blinked. "I don't have one." "You always have one." "I used to." "Then what are you doing here?" "Learning what it means to stay," she said. "Learning what it means to not be in control." "And how's that going?" "Terribly," she said, almost smiling. "But I'd rather fail trying to be honest than succeed pretending I don't care." I sip my coffee. Words are easy. I know. So what happens when someone sees us together? Then they see. You were never willing to be seen with me before. I wasn't willing to be seen as yours, she said quietly. Because I wasn't ready to belong to anyone. I was too busy protecting everything that made me feel powerful. And you threatened all of it. And now I want you to threaten everything. The words sat between us, exposed, alive. And just as I was about to respond, I saw her stiffen, her eyes locked on something over my shoulder. I turned. A woman stood near the door. Tall, elegant, familiar. Vivian Kaur, CFO, one of the board members, someone who had defended Sloane more times than I could count. She was staring at us at our table, at our closeness, at the coffee mug in Sloane's hand, and the way we leaned toward each other just slightly. "Of course," Sloane murmured. "Of course, she's here. You okay?" I asked. "This is it, isn't it?" She whispered. "This is the moment I find out if I meant what I said." I watched her carefully. "You can leave. You can walk out right now and prove I'm still that coward. Or you can stay and prove you're not." Sloane sat back in her chair, lifted her mug, took a slow sip. Vivian approached, her heels clicking with purpose. "Sloane," she said, polite tight. "Fancy seeing you here." "Morning, Vivian. Didn't realize you were in town." I needed a change of scenery. Vivian's eyes slid to me. Then back to Sloane. "And company?" "Intentional," Sloane said. "And overdue." Vivian raised an eyebrow. "Well, enjoy your tea." "We will." And with that, she walked away. Sloane exhaled. Shaky. Sharp. "She's going to tell the board." "Let her. This could cost me everything." "Then maybe you shouldn't have come." "But I did," she said. "And I'm not sorry. Not even a little." "Terrified," she admitted. "But not sorry." I reached across the table, touched her hand just for a second. Her eyes snapped to mine. "Hungry." "Grateful." "You did good." I said, "That means more than you know." "You think she'll really tell them?" "You think she won't?" "They'll have questions, then answer them." "What if they push me out?" "Then you'll finally understand what it felt like when you did it to me." She looked down, nodded. "Fair." We finished our drinks in silence. On the walk back, she stayed closer, not touching, but nearer. As if the distance we'd kept on the way there had been erased. When we reached my door, I turned to her. "You know you're not staying here tonight, right?" Her eyes darkened. "You're kicking me out." "I'm giving you space." I said, "To decide if this is something you're doing for me or if it's something you're doing for you. And if I want it to be both, then show me tomorrow." She hesitated. "You'll still let me knock?" "Only if it's not 2 a.m. this time." She laughed. It was soft. Real. She stepped back. "Okay. Tomorrow. Maybe. Maybe. Depends on how much you mean it." She turned to leave. I watched her go. She didn't look back. And for the first time, I thought maybe, just maybe, she was finally ready to come back. Not as the woman who ruined me, but as the woman who might be willing to fight to earn me. I didn't expect her to come back. Not really. I told myself I was prepared for the silence, for the follow rough, for her to realize this wasn't worth the risk, that I wasn't worth the risk. I tried to be okay with that. Tried to breathe through the ache in my chest as I folded laundry, paced the kitchen, refreshed emails I knew she'd never sent. I told myself it was better this way, clean, quiet, over, but I kept checking the door. At 2:43 p.m. the next day, there was a knock. Not demanding, not desperate, just present. My breath caught. I opened the door. She was there, not in a power suit, not in heels, but in a gray sweater, black jeans, her hair pulled back in a way that made her look 10 years younger and far too vulnerable. Her eyes locked on mine, steady. "May I come in?" I stepped aside. She walked in like she remembered the shape of the place with her body, like it had been imprinted on her skin. She didn't speak right away. She stood in the center of my living room and turned to face me. "I resigned," she said. The words didn't register at first. I blinked. You what? I gave my resignation to the board this morning. Effective immediately. You're not serious. I am. Why? Because I told you I was ready to be seen. And staying in that role meant staying silent. It meant letting people decide what I was allowed to feel, who I was allowed to love. It meant pretending I was still the woman who put her name before everything else. I stared at her, heart thundering. You walked away from your company. I walked away from a position that required me to lie to myself. To you, I'm not that person anymore. And you think this makes it better? You think this makes us even? No. She said, this isn't about evening the score. This is about being someone new. Someone who deserves to look at you and not see shame in your eyes. You think I feel shame? You think I don't? Silence stretched. She stepped closer. I didn't come here to ask you for anything. I came to give you something. What? The truth? She said, the raw, terrifying, inconvenient truth. That I love you. That I never stopped. That I lost more than a brilliant mind when you walked out of that building. I lost the only version of myself that felt like home. I tried to bury it in meetings, in numbers, in flights and board presentations, but it didn't go away. My throat tightened. So, you quit. I chose you. You don't even know if I want you. I don't, she said. But I wanted to come back as someone you might consider loving. I stared at her long hard. Then I walked past her. She didn't follow. I went to the kitchen, grabbed a glass of water, tried to steady my hands. She had resigned. Sloane Voss had walked away from her throne. For me, I came back. She was still standing in the same spot. Her hands were shaking. I didn't expect this, I said. Neither did I. You had everything. Not if I didn't have you. So what happens now? Now, she said softly. I wait for you to decide if you want to try again. If you want to build something new, not as employee and boss. Not as enemies. Just as us. I looked at her, truly looked. No title, no armor, just a woman trying not to break under the weight of her own honesty. I walked to her slowly, stopped inches away. You really left it all? Every piece. And you're scared? More than I've ever been? I touched her wrist. Good. Good. Because if you weren't scared, I wouldn't believe you. She exhaled shakily. I leaned in. Close. Closer. Her eyes fluttered shut. Not yet, I whispered. I need more. Anything. Not gestures, not power plays. I need consistency. I need you to show up. Not just when it's dramatic, but when it's boring, when I'm quiet, when you don't know what I need. Okay. I don't want a grand gesture. I want 1,000 small ones. You'll have them, she said. All of them. Then start now. She looked confused. Now take off your shoes. Fold that blanket on the couch. Make tea. Act like you live here. And tomorrow do it again. A pause. Then she smiled. Small. Honest. You're going to make me work for this. Damn right I am. She stepped back, toed off her boots, folded the blanket, walked into the kitchen. I followed, watched her open the cabinet like she knew where everything was. Mint or chamomile? She asked. Surprise me? She turned. Thank you for what? For making this real. Don't thank me yet. I crossed the space between us. This time, I kissed her first. Slow, certain. She melted into it like it was a vow. And maybe it was a beginning, not clean, not easy, but ours. The next few days passed like something out of someone else's life. It wasn't dramatic. There were no explosions, no screaming matches or wild declarations, just quiet, just heard showing up. Every morning, Sloane arrived at 9 a.m. sharp like clockwork. Except this time, it wasn't to deliver a strategy memo or prep for a merger. It was to make tea, clumsily fold laundry, and ask me what I wanted from the grocery store. She was terrible at domesticity. She couldn't cook to save her life. Left watermarks on the counter and consistently forgot which cabinet held the mugs, but she kept trying and I kept watching. I wasn't ready to name what we were building, but I knew it was fragile and real and dangerous in a way that made my chest feel too small. One afternoon, I found her in the living room sitting cross-legged on the floor surrounded by papers. Not work documents, not contracts, sketches, rough drafts, business concepts. What is all this? I asked from the doorway. She looked up, pushing her glasses higher on her nose. Glasses I'd never seen her wear in the office. Ideas for what? For something new, she said. Something not built in a glass tower. Something built with people I trust. You mean with me? If you'll let me. I didn't answer. I walked over, sat beside her, picked up a rough brand concept, minimalist, bold colors. A tagline scrolled in her unmistakable handwriting. Integrity, intimacy, impact. You're starting from scratch, I said. Yeah, that scares you more than anything, but you're still here. Because you scare me more. Why? Because you see me, she whispered. And you don't flinch. My hand brushed hers. Neither of us moved away. Later that evening, we made dinner together, or tried to. She burned the first batch of rice. I teased her. She grinned like I'd handed her the moon. I cooked the vegetables. She set the table. We took our seats across from each other and ate in a hush soft enough to breathe through, breaking it now and then with a small laugh when our eyes lingered too long. I couldn't stop watching her. She was shedding pieces of herself, the CEO armor, the corporate cadence, and underneath was a woman who laughed a little too loudly when she was nervous. Who double-checked the stove twice, who kept glancing at me like I was the answer to a question she was still scared to ask. That night, she didn't stay. I told her I needed space. She didn't argue, just pressed a kiss to my forehead and said, "Same time tomorrow." I nodded. She showed up the next morning with fresh pastries and an apology for stealing the last clean towel. I rolled my eyes and told her I'd deduct it from her non-existent rent. It became a rhythm, a ritual, a wordless dance. And the tension sharpened by degrees, every brush of her hand near mine, every glance that held too long, every breath shared in the too small kitchen when we reached for the same drawer. One night I caught her watching me at the sink. I turned. She didn't look away. "You're staring," I said. "I can't help it." "Why not?" "Because you make the world feel quiet." I dried my hands and stepped toward her. "What does that even mean?" "It means," she said, voice low, "that with you, I don't have to pretend. I don't have to perform. I don't have to win. I just am." Her hands hovered at my waist, not touching, waiting. My breath hitched. "You're doing it again." "What?" "Looking at me like I'm yours." "Maybe I want to be." "Then why haven't you kissed me?" "Because I'm waiting for you to ask." I moved closer. "I'm not ready." "I know," she said, "but I want to be." "So do I." She reached up, slid a stray piece of hair behind my ear. Her fingers skimmed my cheek. I leaned into it, just barely, then pulled back. "Not yet," I whispered. "Okay." She smiled. "But soon, maybe." I turned away, but the warmth clung long after she left. That night I dreamed of her, hands that didn't hesitate, mouths that already knew the map of each other, a version of us unafraid. I woke aching, not broken. It happened so fast there was no time to be embarrassed. I was reaching for the top shelf in the hall closet, tugging down the box of winter scarves I'd shoved up there last year. My balance slipped. My foot skidded. My knee twisted wrong. Pain knifed up my leg, bright and instant. I crumpled to the floor with a breathless sound I didn't recognize. The box crashed beside me, scarves scattering across the hardwood like a failed magic trick. "Riley Hart." Sloane's voice came from the kitchen, too far, then the rapid drum of her footsteps. "Riley Hart." She dropped to my side, eyes wide, hands hovering, not touching. "Are you okay? What happened?" "It's fine," I managed through my teeth. "I'm fine." "You're not." "It's my knee. Landed weird. It's not broken." "Let me see." "Sloane, please," I gave in. She reached out, careful and slow, fingertips ghosting along my calf, her touch feather-light. When she pressed along the side of my knee, I hissed. Her gaze snapped to mine. "Okay," she said softly. "No pressure there." "Got it." She helped me up in increments, her arms firm at my waist. Every shift sparked a protest in my body. I swallowed it down. She guided me to the couch, eased me to sit, then knelt in front of me like she'd done it 100 times. "Do you need ice?" "Yes," I breathed. She disappeared. I glared at the ceiling, furious with myself, for the clumsiness, for giving her one more reason to see me vulnerable. But when she returned, her eyes didn't hold pity. They held something else entirely. She wrapped an ice pack in a towel and set it gently against the side of my knee. "You're okay," she whispered. "I've got you." "I didn't ask for that." "You didn't have to." She looked up. Her face was close. One hand kept the ice steady. The other slid to my thigh and rested there, warm, anchoring. "You don't have to prove anything," she said. "Not to me. Not anymore." "I wasn't trying to prove anything." "You are trying to be strong because if I'm not, then what am I?" "Mine," she said. My breath caught. "That's not fair." "No," she said, "it's not, but it's true." Her hand moved slowly from my thigh to my hip, tracing the curve of me like she didn't even realize she was doing it. I didn't stop her. I didn't want to. "You're hurt," she said. "But all I can think about is how beautiful you look right now." "You're not supposed to say that." "Then you shouldn't let me this close." I reached for her face. My fingers touched her jaw, soft and hot. Her breath hitched. "Don't kiss me unless you mean it," I whispered. "I do. Don't touch me unless you're going to stay this time." "I'm already here." I leaned forward slowly. She met me halfway. The kiss wasn't soft. It wasn't polite. It was weeks of tension snapping between us like a live wire. She groaned into my mouth, her hands suddenly everywhere. My waist, my back, my thighs. I pulled her closer, gasping as our bodies finally aligned. As heat flooded every part of me that had been aching for this, she pushed me back gently against the couch, careful of my leg, her mouth trailing down my throat, her breath hot and reverent. "Tell me to stop," she murmured. "Never," I said, her hand slid under my shirt, fingers exploring slowly, deliberately. I arched into her, my hands tingling in her hair. She kissed me like I was air, like she hadn't breathed in weeks. "You don't know how long I've wanted this," she said against my skin. "Then show me," I said. And she did. Clothes came off slowly, not in a rush, but in reverence. Her mouth explored every inch of me like she was memorizing it, relearning the geography of a body she'd once only known in dreams. She touched me like I was hers. I let her. I wanted her, needed her. And when she slid her fingers inside me, when my breath caught and my back arched and I whispered her name like a confession, I saw it in her eyes. Devotion, not lust, not guilt, something deeper, something she'd buried for too long. I came with her name on my lips, her mouth against my throat, her hand pressed firm over my heart like she needed to feel it racing. When the tremors faded, she held me. No words, just breath, just skin, just us. Later, tangled under a blanket, I looked at her. "You didn't have to stay." "I didn't want to leave." "This changes things." "I hope so." "Are you scared?" "Terrified." "Good," I said. "Me, too." She smiled, kissed my shoulder. "We'll figure it out together." And I believed her because for the first time, she didn't try to fix me. She just held me. And that was enough. The morning after tasted like warm sheets, the smell of skin, and the terrifying stillness of everything finally said. There was no rush to move, no alarm clock. No meeting waiting to drag either of us away, only the sound of her breathing beside me. The soft scratch of cotton against her bare shoulder. And the low hum of sunlight pushing through the curtains. I didn't open my eyes for a while. I just laid there absorbing it all. The weight of her arm over my waist. The curve of her leg tangled with mine. The way my body acted, not from pain, but from presence. From letting someone touch places I thought I'd buried too deep to feel again. Sloane Voss, the woman who had once walked past my desk without looking at me after cutting off every ladder I was climbing, was now asleep in my bed, shirtless, quiet, and more real than she had ever allowed herself to be. When I finally turned my head to look at her, she was already watching me. No makeup, no armor, just her eyes soft, guarded by nothing. "Hi," she whispered. "Hi," I answered. She reached out and brushed her fingers over my collarbone like she was trying to memorize it. "Are you okay? Physically, emotionally?" "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "You terrified, but for once, not of losing, just of messing this up." I propped myself on one elbow. "You didn't leave. I told you I wouldn't. People say a lot of things when they want something." She winced but didn't look away. "I know. That's why I'm still here. Not because I got what I wanted, but because I want everything after, too." "And what happens now?" "Now we stop pretending this was a deed. This is the road." "You're talking like it's simple." "It's not, but it's worth it." She kissed me then, soft, slow, and without expectation. Just oppressive lips that said, "Thank you for letting me stay." After breakfast, burnt toast and coffee made too strong. We didn't say much. The silence wasn't heavy. It was cautious, like neither of us wanted to press too hard against something still fragile. We sat on the couch, sharing a blanket, legs touching, fingers brushing occasionally as she flipped through the news on her phone. That's when the message came. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her entire posture stiffening. I watched her read, her jaw tightened. "What is it?" I asked. She turned the screen toward me. It was a message from Tessa Mendez, a name I hadn't heard in a year. Once a junior exec under me, quick-witted, sharp-tongued, ambitious, and entirely too observant. The message said, "You can lie to the board, but not to the people who remember how you looked at her. You left for her. Be honest about that." At least I sat up straighter. She knows. She always knew. Sloane said. She saw it before I did. Is she going to say anything? Probably. Maybe not officially, but people will talk. So, what now? You start over and everyone in your orbit whispers about how you threw your career away from me. No, she said, setting the phone down. They'll talk about how I finally did something for myself for the right reason. You sure about that? Aren't you? I didn't answer right away. I stood, walked to the window. The air outside looked cold, sharp. A few people hurried down the sidewalk, wrapped in coats, coffee in hand, late for nothing and everything. I want to be, I said, finally. But there's still a part of me that doesn't know if this is about love or guilt. Redemption or obsession. She stood slowly, walked over, didn't touch me. Do you want me to go? I don't know. What do you want? That question undid me. Not because I didn't know, but because I did. I wanted her. Still, despite it all, I turned. She was there, barefoot, shirt rumpled, eyes open, vulnerable. I want to trust that you're not going to vanish when the guilt fades. I won't. I want to believe this isn't just you trying to fix the one thing you couldn't control. It's not. Then say it without apology, without strategy. Say what this is. She stepped forward close enough to touch but didn't. This is me in love with you, she said. Not the version of you I used to see through boardroom glass. Not the woman I tried to keep at a distance because I couldn't control how much I wanted her. But you as you are. The one who challenged me, who hurt me back, who still makes me want to be better even when you scare the hell out of me. My throat tightened. She continued, I'm not here to fix anything. I'm here because even if I lose everything else, I need to know that I didn't lose the chance to be yours. Not as the boss, not as the villain, just Sloane. I exhaled slowly. I touched her face, my fingers tracing her jaw, her mouth. You're still a mess, I whispered. I know, but you're my mess now. She pulled me in. Not for a kiss, just a hug. Her arms wrapped around me, her face buried in my neck like she needed the contact to believe this was real. And maybe I did, too. We stayed like that for a long time, just holding, just breathing. And for the first time in years, I stopped bracing for the fall because maybe this time she'd catch me. It started with an invitation, a charity gala downtown hosted by a former colleague we both knew too well. A night full of stiff dresses, curated speeches, and enough quiet networking tension to make anyone nostalgic for boardroom politics. I hadn't planned on going. I hadn't wanted to. But Sloane brought the invitation to the kitchen one morning, held it out to me like a challenge, and said, if I'm really yours now, then let's show them. I didn't answer right away. My coffee was still hot, my brain barely awake, and the idea of standing in front of all those people, former coworkers, skeptics, vultures with wine glasses made my skin. But then she added, we don't owe them anything, but I owe you truth, and this is part of that. I looked at her. No mask, no push, just honesty, just Sloane. So I said, yes. The night of the gala, I stood in front of the mirror in a black dress I hadn't worn since my last real corporate event. It still fit, barely. I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me, stronger, softer, scarred in ways no fabric could hide. And then Sloane stepped into the room and everything else fell away. She wore a midnight blue suit that fit her like it had been made just for this moment. Her hair was pinned back, elegant and deliberate, but her eyes were fixed on me like I was gravity. You look, she started. I raised an eyebrow. Dangerous. Good. Beautiful, too, she added softer, but mostly dangerous. I smiled. We didn't talk on the way there. The car was quiet, but not tense. Her hand found mine in the space between us, and she held it the entire ride. When we arrived, I felt my stomach twist. The venue was all glass and chandeliers. Too many familiar faces, too many cameras. We walked through the front doors together, and I braced myself for the wave. The stares came fast, whispered names, long looks, some faces lit with curiosity, others with judgment. But I kept walking and Sloane stayed beside me. She didn't let go. Not once. We moved through the crowd like we belonged there. Like nothing between us was taboo or fragile. She introduced me as Riley Hart. Not a friend. Not a guest. Not someone vague and easy to dismiss. Just my name. Clear. Proud. Intentional. I watched people react. Some stiffened. Others smiled knowingly. No one said anything cruel, at least not where we could hear it. And then the moment we hadn't planned for happened. Someone handed Sloane a mic. "We'd love to hear a few words." The host said, "You've been a leader in this industry for years, and your presence here tonight means more than you know." I saw the hesitation in her eyes, the flicker of that old fear. But she stepped up anyway, took the mic, stood in front of a crowd that had once obeyed her voice, and this time spoke as herself. "I used to think leadership was about control," she said. "About making sure people saw what you wanted them to see. About power, efficiency, isolation, even." She paused. Her eyes found me. "But real leadership, real truth starts when you stop hiding. When you let yourself be seen for everything you are, even the parts that aren't polished, especially those parts." She glanced back at the crowd. "I left a company I built because I realized I'd build it at the cost of something far more valuable. Connection, honesty, love. I'm not here tonight as a CEO. I'm here as someone who got it wrong for a long time and is finally starting to get it right." There was silence, then applause. Polite maybe, but real. When she handed back the mic and returned to me, her hands were shaking. "You okay?" I whispered. "Ask me again in 5 minutes." That was brave. "No, you're brave. I'm just finally trying to keep up." "You're doing better than that." I kissed her then, in front of everyone. One hand on her cheek, the other wrapped around her waist. Not soft, not subtle, certain. When I pulled back, her smile broke something open in me I didn't even realize I'd been guarding. The rest of the night passed in a blur of champagne and conversation. We stayed close. We danced once, slow, swaying, her hands on my lower back, my head tucked into her neck. At one point, Tessa Mendez approached us. Tessa glanced at Sloane, then at me. "So, it's real?" "It's real," I said. She weighed us for a beat, then gave a single nod. "Good. I was starting to think neither of you would ever grow the hell up." She walked off, and we burst into unguarded laughter. When the event wrapped, we didn't head to my place. We went to hers, a space I'd never been invited into, cool tones, art-lined walls, and a bed so vast it felt like an ocean. We undressed without hurry, no blaze, just the reverence of two people choosing each other with nothing left to prove. In the hush after, her arm draped around me, her breath steady along my spine, she murmured, "I'd ruin my career all over again if it brought me right here." "Good," I whispered. "Because this time, I'd be the one waiting for you." "You think we'll last?" "No," I said. "I know we will." She kissed my shoulder. I held her closer. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like something broken trying to rebuild. I felt whole. I felt hers. Love didn't feel like a threat anymore, it felt like something we'd earned, together. Thank you so much for your support, whether you're liking, commenting, sharing, or sending your super thanks. You make all the difference here on the channel. See you in the next video.